Hey you guys, it's me Crystal. So today I thought it would be fun to do a book unhaul. I unhaul books pretty regularly, but I haven't filmed a book unhaul in probably a couple years, and I didn't post that video for a couple of reasons. The main reason was because I had this huge stack of books, because it was right after I had gone through my shelves for the first time in years, and so I had a lot of books that I was unhauling. And if you watch some of the older videos, there was like a straight month or two where I just had this stack of books on my staircase in the background before I finally got around to taking them in somewhere. I filmed that video twice. The first time I filmed it, it was over an hour long, and I'm like, I do not want to try to edit this thing down to something manageable. So then I refilmed it, and it was still almost an hour long. And part of the problem was the amount of books, but also some of those books kind of sparked a tangent. And so I was going off on a tangent. I threw a couple of books across the room. And while I thought it was funny, I was like, it's probably a little rude. So I ended up giving up and not posting the video. So this will be the first book unhaul on the channel if you're watching this, which means I didn't get too snarky and decided to actually post a video. So normally I drop the books off locally, or if they're in bad shape, I take them to recycling. But this time I'm actually shipping the books to Better World Books. I'm ready to get them out of my house because I have like a cart where I keep my TBR jars and my current month's TBR. And so on the bottom part of the cart, I've been putting books that I'm unhauling, and it is overflowing. So I need to get these books out of the house. Free up space on the cart so that, you know, I can fill it back up again. So I'm not going to talk about what these books are about. I'm just going to show you the books, give you the genre, and then a little bit of a reason why I'm unhauling them. And hopefully this will be snark light. I don't think there's anything in this pile that will spark a tangent, but you never know. And a couple of these books I've already talked about too. Books that I said I was unhauling in other videos. So anyway, let's get started. Hi, Future Crystal here. I'm going to do voiceovers for some of the books because I ended up going off on a few tangents. To spare you that nonsense, here's future me stepping in to clarify some points here and there. Okay, so tangent number 1. I'm unhauling these books by Christine Feehan, Dark Prince, Dark Desire, Dark Magic, and Magic in the Wind, because the writing and narrative style are simply too over the top for me, both in violence/gore and in general. There are paranormal romances with vampires and maybe witches that I picked up years ago on the recommendation of a friend who recommended them to me because I like reading and I like vampires. The tangent was related to why I kept these books for so long. Not sure why that was so triggering, but whatever. Okay, moving on. I'll just move on. It's fine. Okay, the next two books are these two. So Sea Witch and Sea Witch Rising by Sarah Henning. I've already talked about these, but these are in the unhaul pile. These are YA fantasy mermaid books. And the next book is Winter Spell by Claire Legrand. This is a YA Nutcracker retelling. I've also already talked about this. I've read over 100 pages. I just didn't care. And we don't want books on our shelves that we know we're not going to read, because I already have one of those, and that's City of Bones, and we don't need more. So, and then the next book is The Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick. And I think when I talked about this book, I was on the fence about whether or not I was going to unhaul it. And so I decided to just go ahead and unhaul it, because I'm like, if I can't get into it now, I'm not going to be able to get into it later. With me reading it at the beginning of the year, when usually I have the highest tolerance for things that are not up my alley. This is what I call higher concept adult fantasy. And I thought it sounded interesting. And I think the story and the characters were actually pretty interesting. I just couldn't do the writing. It was very heavy. You know, just a lot of long fantasy names for like everything. And that's just not the style of book that I would rather read if I can help it. And I can. Okay, next we have The Countess by Rebecca Johns. This is this is just historical fiction. I don't think there are supernatural elements in this, But it's a historical fictionalized novel about Countess Elizabeth Bathory. I just thought the writing was super dry, and I couldn't do it. Also talked about this already though too. And then another book I talked about already is The Time Weaver by Shauna Abe. This is the first book I read this year. It is adult fantasy romance with, you know, dragons, which sounds a lot more exciting than it is. This was really boring. I think I called this a convoluted fantasy romance with tacky dragon wallpaper. I think that's what I put in my notes. And also, maybe this is my fault. When I was marking this book as read on Goodreads, I found out like this is book 5 and it's a companion series. So it's not like I was lost, but now that I know that, it actually makes a lot of sense because there are a couple of characters that the author seemed to like really be a fan of. And I'm like, but they were like very minor characters. And it turns out they were like main characters in like another book. So I'm like, that would have been helpful to know, but I bought this at a used bookstore, and how am I supposed to know this is book 5 in a companion series? Do you see book 5 on the spine or on the back or anywhere? No, you don't, because it's not there. And then next we have The Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. I just talked about this as well. I just thought this was boring, and, you know, the interesting concepts and like my desire to read a book, that only provides so much reading energy. And it dissipated quite quickly when I was reading this book, but I did force myself to read more than I probably normally would have, just because I did really want to read this book. But yeah, I don't like being bored, and I have options, so I quit. And then I have Wicked Saints and Ruthless Gods by Emily A. Duncan. I got both of these books at the same time because it sounded really, really interesting. And I do think that this is probably a story that I would like. But again, I kind of had a problem with the writing. It just felt kind of rambly and aimless. And I just didn't care. And again, like, my excitement over the concept, it was only going to go so far. So these are YA fantasy books. Also, I don't think I mentioned, this is adult paranormal. Okay, so these next several books are all by the same author, and this is one of those cases where like I met this author at a couple of writing conferences, and so I picked up some of her books. Okay, so next voiceover, I unhauled all of my CJ Redwine books, a YA dystopian trilogy, some fairy tale retellings in a shared world, and a nonfiction book about how to write a query letter and get an agent, yada yada. This is where I went off on tangent number 2. I initially picked up a couple of her books at a writing conference almost 7 years ago. She's a local author, so I wanted to support her. However, fast forward 5 years, and I went to one of her book launch events, and she made an offhanded remark, and what I'm sure was a very practiced story that she thought was the peak amount of adorable, but I found that offhand comment offensive. I'm not easily offended, but when I am, I tend to stick my head in the sand and pretend it's not happening, and this was no exception. But that was 3 years ago, and I'm still a little put off by it, so I'm getting rid of all of her books because I don't want to look at them anymore, and I realize I can't read them without being super biased and running her words through a filter that's going to make anything even remotely off color stand out as offensive. Okay, so the next book I have is Hex by Michelle Chris. This is an ARC, and there's a bookmark in here that I got from the author. Also got a signed book plate. And I read this book years ago, and this is book 1 of 2, and this book is actually wraps up pretty well on its own. It's a YA paranormal book about witches. But then there's like this epilogue, and the epilogue has a cliffhanger, and it pissed me off. So I haven't read book 2. When did this book come out? 6/14. So I'm not going to read book 2. I'm not going to reread this. I gave it 4 stars initially, but this is one of those books, like, the more I think about it, the more I don't like it. And it was just fine, but I didn't hate it. It's just, I know I'm not going to reread it. I'm not going to read the sequel. And, you know, I might read other books by her one day, but I don't need to keep this one. Yeah, so this can be recycled or something, because when you send a book to Better Worlds Books, they either sell it, donate it, or recycle it. And so they can deal with this. And then next, this book looks chunky, but it's actually like really light. So this is an anthology of vampire stories written by women. So the Mammoth Book of Vampire Stories by Women. And Anne Rice has a story in here. I have not read this. This is one of those books that I think I picked up on a whim at the used bookstore. And then I've been looking at this book for years. I'm so sick of looking at this. It is a little tacky or something. And I just don't want to look at it anymore. I almost kept this, and I tried moving it to the bottom bookshelf, kind of in the corner, but I knew it was there. And I'm like, I just want this book out of my house. Every single time I unhaul books, I'm like, I want to unhaul this book, and then I don't, because I'm like, but what if you like it? You like anthologies. You like vampire stories. I even kind of like Anne Rice, but I'm just like, I don't want this anymore. So I think I will feel better once this book is gone and I don't have to look at it anymore. Next, we have Tested by Magic by Jasmine Walt and Shatterborn, co-written by Jasmine Walt and Rebecca Hamilton. I got these at a writing conference about 3.5 years ago. The novella was free in our conference bags, and Shatterborn was free at her table. I went there to get the novella signed and asked her about being an indie author because I had recently decided to try that route. This was at the very beginning of that journey, so the stress bomb hadn't gone off yet, but the minor issue I'm having over these books is that she did kind of stare at me like there was something weird growing out of my head, and it actually made me super uncomfortable, and I couldn't look at those books without feeling uncomfortable all over again, so that's why I'm unhauling them. I'm not mad at her, but I've been through this before, and it really does make me not want to read the books anymore. Eventually, I get sick of being weird about it, and it's just easier and cheaper to unhaul the books than it is to find a good therapist and pay for therapy. And this book that I also picked up at a conference, she wasn't there, but I picked this up at the bookshop, and it's Reborn by CC Hunter. I think this is YA Paranormal. I think this book is actually like, if you've read a lot of YA Paranormal books, like LJ Smith, like late 90s, early 2000s, this feels kind of like that book. It has that very similar vibe. I've had this book for a while. I've never picked it up. I never wanted to pick it up. And when I was putting books in TBR jars and I was writing down all the books that I have that are unread, and putting them in jars, when I saw this book, I did not want to put it in a jar. And the rule was, if you don't want to put it in a jar, you get rid of it. So I'm finally getting rid of it. And another book that I picked up at a writer's conference is Branded by Kiri Taylor. And she was super nice. So I kept this book for so long because she was super nice, and because I actually, had a good experience and I felt welcome at her booth, But when I tried to read this, it's just not, just the writing, it wasn't great. Okay. And I don't know how old this book is in relation, she has a ton of books out. She's an indie author. So I'm sure her writing is just amazing now. So I'm not going to read this. I've had this book for a while. I think I got it in 2014. So if I haven't read it by now, it's not going to get read. And I feel bad, but another book I feel bad about getting rid of is A Song of the Dryad by Natalia Lee. She is a YouTuber, and she used to make a lot of AuthorTube videos, and I'm still subscribed to her channel, and I still really like her. And I think I might read some of her other books, but I did read a little bit of this one. It's a little sweet. For my taste, she calls this a cozy YA contemporary. It reads more like middle grade though, which is fine. But it's just not quite my taste. But this is another book that I've kept longer than I should have, just because I do, you know, really like the author. And I really like her channel. And I don't think I should feel bad for getting rid of books that I don't want to read, but I do feel bad about that one. The last two books I am unhauling are these Twilight graphic novels. Look at that. Okay, so the reasons why I'm unhauling these is not because I didn't like them. I actually love these, but I have the collector's edition. So I feel like next time I get the urge to read the Twilight graphic novel, that I'll just read this one, since it has volumes 1 and 2 together. And I really like this because it has like these pops of color, and you know, it cuts out, you know, a lot of that narrative that's a little annoying in the Twilight book. And it's just, you know, it cuts all that stuff out, and I just love this so much. So I have this one. So there's no reason for me to have these. I'm not one of those people who like to have multiple copies of books on my shelf. And even though I know people do that and they can totally do that, I'm not that kind of a person. So this is a duplicate. But yeah, for the record, I'm not unhauling this. This is going back on the shelf. Okay, a different day, different videos, different tangents. This is almost entirely voiced over for both your sanity and mine. Then after this, we'll go back to the original video for the original outro. So up next is Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell. This is an adult science fiction that came in January's Illumicrate box. I didn't go off on a tangent about anything. I was just rambling in this part, so I'm doing a voiceover for clarification reasons. I said in that unboxing video that this book didn't sound interesting to me. I did force myself to read some of it because this book is so stunning, but I don't want to keep books that I'm not interested in just because they're pretty, and I don't want to force myself to read stuff. Neither point of view in this book was doing anything for me, and the world wasn't drawing me in either because, as I suspected, this book just isn't up my alley. I really hope this goes to a good home, but that good home is not with me. Here we have Angel Mage and the Left-Handed Booksellers of London by Garth Nix. I received both of these in book boxes, but I'm mostly unhauling the Left-Handed Booksellers of London because of Angel Mage. So speaking of Angel Mage, I knew from the description that this book wasn't for me, but I wanted to give it a chance anyway for some reason. I actually found this book to be pretty easy to read. However, this is a case of me being offended again. It was the way he was describing a lot of the characters in the book. To avoid going off on another tangent, I'll just be brief and say that I found the descriptions of these characters to be weird and unnecessary and off-putting. Also, his style of storytelling isn't for me. I don't really like his narrative style in Angel Mage or in the Left-Handed Booksellers of London, but in Angel Mage specifically, I wasn't feeling the points of view at all. I even skipped ahead a little to see if there were any points of view that I would like, but there wasn't. And there were only more off-putting descriptions at every stopping point that I just found unnecessary and weird and offensive. So the Left-Handed Booksellers of London is mostly a casualty of me not wanting to read a book by this guy anymore. But I did read a little bit of it anyway. It just wasn't interesting enough to override the discomfort I was feeling. And like I said, I wasn't into the narrative style or the points of view in that book either, but I didn't find it offensive. Here, I went off on a side tangent about how I should have unhauled some of these books from the get-go based on the blurbs. If I don't find the blurbs interesting, then chances are very high that I won't find the books interesting either. It's subjective, and we all have different tastes, and I want to do better about not feeling guilty about not wanting to read books that aren't up my alley. For the record, though, I literally go off about Angel Mage and book descriptions in general for 15 minutes. So, quick voiceover for The White Raven by Carrie D. Miller. There's just more rambling. This is an adult contemporary fantasy with witches. This was another case of me just not liking the writing style. I wasn't half talking about this book at all, even. I went off on a side thing about bookshelf organization and aesthetics that literally had nothing to do with this book, because this book was not the cause for the aesthetic issues that I was having. Then we have The Elysian Prophecy by Vivian Reese. This is a YA contemporary / maybe portal fantasy. Vivian is a YouTuber. I bought this book because I like her, and I actually have read the prequel novella to this because she gives it out free to newsletter subscribers, but I don't actually want to read this book anymore. I feel really bad about unhauling it, but I really shouldn't feel bad for unhauling books that I don't want to read. There wasn't a problem with the writing. It was more that the storytelling style just wasn't really working for me. So yeah. And then the last book that maybe I'm unhauling this time is Cool by Jennifer Albin. And this is another book I'm really loath to unhaul. And that's just because she gave a keynote speech at a writer's conference that I went to almost 7 years ago now. Has it really been 7 years? Oh my gosh. Anyway, and I just have so much respect for her, but this is sci-fi again. And I was reading this book and I'm like, I have no idea where I am or why or what's going on. And it was just one of those books that starts with an action scene and the main character gets abducted. And I tried to keep reading and push a little bit further, but I'm like, after a while, I couldn't stand not knowing where I was anymore. And after almost 7 years, I'm not going to read this book. Like, it's been staring at me and making me feel guilty for some reason for 6 years, and I don't want to feel guilty anymore. I don't want it looking at me anymore. Okay, so up next, we have a few more books that I'm not interested in reading. Same day as the previous video, but it'll be pretty obvious in this next clip that I just gave up on trying to film a proper unhaul video. So yeah. Here we have Set Fire to the Gods, a co-authored YA fantasy, and I'm so sorry, I don't remember people's names and I don't have the book in front of me anymore, but you should be able to see them on the cover. This came in a LitJoy subscription book box. I did read some of this. It's just not my style. And again, I knew it wasn't as soon as I saw it, but I love the fan art so much and still do. So I wanted to give it a try, but I really don't want to read this. Then we have Daughter of Chaos by Jen McConnell, a YA paranormal with witches. It's just the writing again. I've had this book for years and finally decided to crack it open. Also, don't ask me why I'm showing the books off this way. Then last, there's Fortuna Sworn by KJ Sutton, a new adultish urban fantasy. Kelsey literally wrote one of my most favorite YA paranormal books ever, which is called Some Quiet Place, but I couldn't get into Fortuna Sworn. I actually haven't liked any of her other books, which is really sad for me. And now we go back to Past Krystal to wrap things up. Okay, so those are all the books that I am unhauling right now, and yeah, I don't think I was being too rude. So that is all for this video, and yeah, feel free to drop me a comment if you want, and yeah, I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.